this is Kate from Generate Magic. So I want to expand on the discussion from my last video on how when I stopped worrying so much about all the little things, meaning all the conditions, all the thoughts and feelings, and all the things that we learn about in the manifestation community or just the spiritual community in general, about what we need to do before we can feel fulfilled, whether it's a mental diet or raising your vibration or raising your frequency or shadow work or healing your inner child. It just goes on and on and on, right? And the moment I just abandoned all that and rested in this divine perfection, knowing that all of the appearances, and again, these could be both inner and outer appearances, knowing that all the appearances are changing anyway, and so there's really no need to get so worked up about any of them. But the more that I rested in that divine perfection, that sense that everything is wonderful, that sense that everything is perfect, then I would find that everything would just kind of work itself out naturally. And even things on the surface that didn't seem to be perfect would actually be working to my benefit or working to my advantage. And when you look back at the bigger picture, you can always kind of see how all of the parts just fit together beautifully. And so, and I also kind of talked about when I first heard this concept of I am, I thought it was just a bunch of abstract nonsense. I was like, you know, how, or be still and know that you are God. And I almost kind of felt like these teachers were insulting me. And I was like, surely it can't be that easy. Surely there has to be more to it than that. And I wanted some directions. I wanted some action items. And especially being a very kind of cerebral, very logical minded person, this just wasn't something that I could really grasp. And so I was just very frustrated whenever I would hear these phrases. But more and more so each day, I find that I'm living them experientially, and not through force and effort, but just through the experience of living them and embodying them more so each day. And of course, this process is going to be individual for everybody. And so unfortunately, there's not really a blueprint for it or a magic formula, which is also something that I discussed in my last video. But hopefully by describing my experiences, I can open up something for you as well. And also just to know that there's no, wherever you are, like in this process, there's no shame, there's no condemnation, because I've been there as well. And I realized that it's all just part of the process. And so the other day I was feeling very low. And it wasn't just the feelings and the thoughts, but it was the stories that were attached to it. And I'm not going to go into the stories, but they were very disempowering stories. And it was just this very heavy feeling. And I just felt very stuck. And I didn't like it. And so I was trying to change the story. I was listening to these teachers that I thought would kind of get me out of my state. And I was just trying to kind of pump myself up and say positive affirmations. And everything I was doing was only increasing my sense of frustration. And so I was like, you know, I'm just going to let it be. And so this is where a saying, I'm not sure if it was originally from A Course in Miracles, but that's where I learned it, the saying, hold on to nothing. It's such a powerful statement. And I feel more so, even more so than releasing. Because even releasing kind of feels like an action that you have to take. And that also was something that was very frustrating to me when I learned about the release technique. And once again, like I wanted like an action step, and I kept kind of questioning myself, questioning whether I was doing it right. But hold on to nothing is something that's kind of beyond questioning, because I don't know, there's just something very freeing about this whole concept. And I was like, you know, I don't need to worry about this. I don't need to worry about this story. Like, it's all just like any condition. It's all just going to kind of fade away anyway. It's just going to kind of resolve itself. And like a lot of our mental chatter just kind of naturally fades away. And sure enough, I just kind of went about my day, and soon soon it was kind of less, I wasn't necessarily, I would say, like in a great mood or an empowered mood, but at least those very loud voices in my head that were in that loud inner conversation was much less prominent, I would say. Mainly just because I was no longer focused on it. And I was also no longer focused on trying to get rid of it or resisting it, which I feel like is also a key point. But I was doing I like to call it my dance meditation, as I do every day. And I just kind of select whatever kind of comes up on my computer. Sometimes I'll listen to tracks more than once, but I like to kind of change it up because I have a tendency of like listening to the same track over and over again, or the same album, and then I'll get kind of burned out on it. And so I like to kind of keep it fresh. And so I came across this album by Andrew Weatherall, who's a really good dance music artist. I guess that's the best way to describe him. I actually saw him live several years ago, I think back in 2017. It was a very incredible experience, very unforgettable experience. But yeah, I just happened to come across an album of his, and immediately it lifted me into this I would call it this very divine state. And one thing of note is, I guess I don't want to get too technical on the genres. I guess you would call this genre like acid house. And of course, within that, I'm sure there's all sorts of like subgenres. But I think the important thing to note was that there was no lyrics. And so it essentially kind of provided a clean slate. And because I think also often when we're trying to kind of get into a different state, or we're trying to change our story, what we're trying to do is we're trying to kind of layer one thing onto another thing. And to use the analogy of a chalkboard or a whiteboard, I prefer the dry erase boards. I can't stand the feel of the chalk on my fingers, and this is as a former classroom teacher, and like just the sound that the chalk makes on the chalkboard. So I prefer dry erase boards. But anyway, so if you have like a whiteboard, and it's like you're just trying to kind of cram more and more notes onto the whiteboard, and pretty soon you run out of room, and everything just kind of feels very cluttered and very jumbled, which if you're already feeling frustrated, it can just amplify that sense of frustration. And so instead, there's something very freeing just about erasing the board and just starting over fresh. And so I feel like this is what kind of listening, I guess you can call it ambient music or instrumental music. But yeah, I prefer kind of dance music that, you can call it maybe trance music, where it kind of gets you into that trance-like state. And it gets you out of your head because there are no lyrics. There's nothing really to think about. And to me, and kind of combined with the physical movement, it kind of gets you, just into this very deep meditative state. And to me, that is kind of like the state of being I am, because I am, to me, is just this kind of formless state where you're no longer attached to your identity or your story. You're just one with God and all that is. And it's a very beautiful feeling. And so to me, dancing is really kind of what gets me into that feeling. And it's just very freeing. And it's just knowing, again, that you don't have to hold on to anything because it's always changing anyway. And the only reason that these stories carry so much weight is because what we're kind of literally doing is we're kind of stringing all these things together, and we're kind of noticing like all these repeating patterns. And the more that we notice that a pattern's repeating, the more that we can seem stuck. And so that's why if you've been experiencing something, whether it's a financial issue or a relationship issue or a health issue, or I don't even like to say issue, let's just say a pattern, right? And you've experienced it maybe for months or years or perhaps your whole life. And it can seem very hard to break free free of. But the instant you kind of go back into that state, back in that formless state, where you just completely step out of the identity in that story, and it's like I don't even want to say a whole new avatar, because it's like you don't even really have an avatar in that moment. It's like a very freeing feeling, and it reminds you that truly, like, every moment is a clean slate, and you don't have to keep recreating the same experiences over and over and over again. And another way, if you're not a fan of dance music or dancing, there's other ways to do this too. Another thing I like to do is just to kind of go out in nature and just to kind of stare off into the horizon and really just kind of feel myself melting into the horizon. And that's another way that I feel of just kind of getting into that God state, or getting into that divine states. But anyway, I just wanted to give you a concrete example of feeling experientially what it's like to be I am, or to be still and know I am God, or be still and know that you are God. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.